Born and raised in Gainesville, Florida. We lived right downtown, next door to First Church of the Nazarene, where my daddy was the preacher. We lived downtown, so we didn't have any neighbors. We just lived around businesses in the commercial district. People parked in front of our house at a slant, got out of their cars, and went to work. I sat on the front steps and watched them come to work, ran along beside them all the way to their place of business, and then they closed the door. And I came back home, all alone. There was one house in our neighborhood, right behind us. It was a big two-story yellow Victorian frame house. There's nothing to say about it. I wasn't interested in it on account of there weren't any children that lived there. One day, I was in the backyard with my mother, swinging on the pole at the end of the clothesline. She was hanging clothes on the line. I was telling her everything I knew, singing songs, and all of a sudden, I heard something. It was on the other side of the back fence. I went over to the fence and looked. Wasn't much I could see because the fence was covered with morning glory vines. I parted the vines, looked through. There was a woman over there, down on her hands and knees, big hat on her head, shading her face from the sun. I said, "Who are you?" She said, "Well, I'm Dr. Oed Abbott. Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Elaine Blanchard." She said, "Well, it's nice to know you, Elaine. I've heard you over there before, and you and I ought to get to be friends on account of I just retired from teaching at the university, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time in this backyard. I'm planting tomatoes here. You like tomatoes?" Sometimes. What else do you plant?" I'm going to put cucumbers here, some squash here. I'm going to run sweet peas along that trellis there. And I'm going to put a rose bed over there where the sun's shining. And underneath that cherry tree, I'm going to put a bench so I can sit on it, look around, and enjoy my backyard. Well, I thought, if she was going to be back there doing all that work, somebody needed to keep an eye on her. So every day, that's where I was, right at that fence, parting the morning glory vine, looking this way and that to see where Dr. Abbott was and what she was doing. One day, I came out the kitchen door. Dr. Abbott was doing something. She was at the fence, had on thick gardening gloves and wire pliers in her hands. Snip, 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 snip. She cut that fence in two. Far as I knew, she hadn't asked anybody's permission, just cut the fence in two. Then she grabbed hold of the wire and pulled and pulled and pulled that fence back. Pulled up the morning glory vine, stepped on the weeds, then she stepped right into my backyard. Well, I stepped into her backyard. Then she said, "Come with me." I followed her to a little shed over in the corner of her yard. Opened the door. It was all dark and dusty in there. Over in the corner, there was a stack of smooth stones. She picked one up. She said, "You get the next one there." I did. We went back to that hole she'd cut in the fence. She put her stone down, said, "Put yours there." I did. We went back to that shed, got two more stones. She put hers down. I put mine down. Went back to the shed, got two more stones. She put hers down. I put mine down. Until the two of us were standing at Dr. Abbott's kitchen door. And when we got there, she brushed her hands and said, "All right then. That's the way you'll come to visit me every day." And so I did. Step, 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 right to her kitchen door. Dr. Abbott! Yoo-hoo! Sometimes we visited on her front porch. She had a swing there. The two of us would sit in it, watch traffic go by on University Boulevard, talk about everybody we saw going by. And sometimes we went into her library. Dr. Abbott had a library in her house. Books from the floor to the ceiling on 3 walls, and right in the middle of the room was a red velvet couch, which we sat on knee to knee, and Dr. Abbott would read to me until I got old enough and I read to her. Sometimes we went upstairs to her sewing room. She had a room upstairs that was windows on 2 walls, lots of sunlight pouring in. Dr. Abbott did needlework. I sat on the hassock in front of her and talked and talked and talked. And Dr. Abbott would say, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, hmm. But my favorite times were the times when Dr. Abbott and I sat together in her kitchen. Sometimes she baked bread. Sometimes she made candy. The two of us would sit in a wicker rocking chair she had, old cushions in it. We'd squeeze in together right in front of an early morning stove. It was the kind of stove you could take a circle off the top and put chunks of wood in. Then you could see the fire burning through holes in the stove. Dr. Abbott and I would just sit in that rocker, feel that warm stove, smell that bread baking. I'd be waiting for the bread to be done, thinking about how good it was going to be. You know, putting some butter on it, watching it melt. It's good, you know, having a friend. It's good to have a neighbor. You know, the kind of neighbor who would cut a gate, make a way from your yard to their kitchen door. Just invite you to step right into their life and then be willing to step right into your life too. Dr. Abbott, she was my neighbor. She was my friend. I told her my stories and she listened. And because she listened, I began to think that my stories matter. And when I began to believe that my stories matter, I also believed that I matter. Dr. Abbott, my neighbor.